Hi, I'm Jack Lesenberry, and welcome back to my podcast. I've been doing all sorts of journalism since the day when every city had 2 newspapers, 3 TV channels, and the internet was something used in fishing. But what hasn't changed is the need to get in-depth information in an interesting way and tell good stories, and that's what I'm trying to do here, especially by bringing you fascinating people who are making a difference. So please join me as often as possible, either via audio or on YouTube, where you can see some of our guests, and also stay tuned for my signature essays at the end of each of these podcasts. You can also read my essays, tune into YouTube, and check out lots of other work on my blog, lesenberryinc.com. That's ink as an ink pen. And thank you for listening and reading, and I hope you keep it up. Now then, for today's story. I was born into a world where African Americans were second-class citizens at best. In many southern states, they couldn't vote and lived in what amounted to virtual apartheid. That has dramatically changed through the civil rights struggle. That civil rights struggle cost a lot of blood and lives. Women have also had to fight for equality in our lifetimes, but it's only in very recent decades that America has begun to recognize that gay and lesbian people were not sick or criminals and had legitimate rights to live their lives the way they want to. And society has lagged even further behind when it comes to respecting the rights of transgender citizens, as well as understanding anything about them. Joining me now are 2 people who are deeply involved in this civil rights movement. Julisa Abad is a transgender Latina woman from Florida who relocated to Michigan a few years ago. I guess nobody told you about the winters here. And Alanna Maguire is the president of FAIR Michigan, an organization that's fighting to end discrimination in the state and make sure everyone is treated fairly. Julissa is also a board member of FAIR, by the way. I guess it's the FAIR Michigan Foundation. I also want to note that while Alanna is married to Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel, she's not necessarily speaking for the Attorney General today or in her work with FAIR. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Well, both of you, welcome both of you to, and thanks for being here. And I wanted to start maybe with you, Alanna, since you're the president. You always want to start with the president. Okay. I'm curious about, first of all, I want you to tell us a little bit about FAIR Michigan, but also I'm confused about something. The state's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act.
Yes.
It was commonly assumed that it didn't cover the rights of gay and transgender citizens, but is there another interpretation of that?
There is another interpretation of that, actually, where you could use the existing Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act and use gender as a way to actually interpret protections for the LGBT community.
Right.
That is something that we hope will go forward. But
now, is the Attorney General studying this? Did she say she was going to issue an opinion on this?
She is supposed to be issuing an opinion on that, yes.
Right.
So.
Wonderful.
Yes. I do have some news about that, though.
Good.
So tomorrow in Lansing, State Senator Jeremy Moss and State Representative Tim Sneller are going to be introducing amendments to Elliott Larson to include civil rights protections.
Now, since this, not everybody may see this on this day, but today, you mean by, it would be June 4th, early in June.
Correct.
They're going to be introducing amendments. Of course, the legislature, both houses are still controlled by the Republicans. They're
Yes.
Democrats, so it may be a fight to get those through, but they're
Yes.
sort of making a record.
Yeah, it's unlikely that it will go forward, but for us, I think that it's certainly symbolic, and we would like to take up that cause.
Wonderful. But Julissa, tell us your story. You are a transgender woman. Did you grow up in Florida?
So I did. I was raised in Florida. I moved to Detroit 2011. It was a culture shock. In places in Florida, there's not a centralized place where trans women congregate.
Right.
So when I first moved here, I Googled places that were LGBT friendly, and Palmer Park came up, Ferndale, and Royal Oak. Because of financial situations, I moved to Palmer Park. I thought that it was just inclusive and open until I realized that all of the women like myself were doing survival sex work.
So they're working as sex workers in order to pay their bills in order to survive.
Correct. In order to survive, in order to get education, food, hormone therapy, like just the essentials that people take for granted. I applied myself for a job. I have a degree and speak 3 languages. I couldn't get employment. The social stigma was that I was only good for sex work. I saw Dana Nessel on the news. I reached out to Fair Michigan, basically told them my story, the plight that trans women of color go through, and that I just needed an opportunity.
Now, this was before Dana Nessel was Attorney General or even a candidate, correct?
Correct. Yes, this was in 2016.
She actually first came, our Attorney General first came to prominence as the attorney for the two nurses in the same-sex adoption case, which later became also about marriage equality, and that case was bundled with other cases and went to the Supreme Court, which in 2015 said people had the right to marry.
Yes.
Correct.
I'm just recounting the history a little bit for people who might not know it. So, how friendly has Michigan been for transgender folks?
Okay, so in the beginning, there was a lot of issues, particularly in the area of 6 Mile and Woodward, which is where a lot of trans women go to do survival sex work and to...
That's always been sort of notorious for all people who do sex work.
Correct. For cisgender men, women,
Right.
doesn't matter how you identify,
Right.
there's a street corner to supply what it is people are looking for. So in that time period, and again, we're talking 2016, there was a lack of education, a lack of mistrust with law enforcement.
Right.
Since then, obviously, we do recognize that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but we have came leaps and bounds. And Michigan is actually being a lot more progressive. There is a lot more policies in place for trans women of color. A lot of trans women that didn't have opportunities like myself back then are in positions that work at organizations to make a difference and continue to do the fight that we're doing.
You mentioned you had a college degree. What is your specialty and what is your profession?
So I went to school for mass communication journalism.
What a mistake.
I know. I went to Suffolk University, and my dream was to be a newscaster one day, and then I ended up doing this.
You're on the news all the time.
Yeah, it kind of just worked.
But you also do have what my former students would have called a jobby job.
Yeah.
And that's kind of interesting. Tell us about that.
So I also work at Wrigley's Pharmacy outside of Fair, Michigan. The reason that I looked for employment was, again, I started to learn all of the reasons as to why trans women would be out there.
Right.
My goal was to eradicate those reasons. So if it was because you're hungry, I looked at organizations that offer food boxes, food. If it's because you need shelter, I started reaching out to organizations to be inclusive for trans individuals. A lot of people like myself can't authentically reflect like they want to because they don't have access to hormone therapy.
Right.
So I started with Wrigley's, again, told them the disparities that trans women go through. Injectable hormones are not covered by any insurance here in Michigan. So through Wrigley's, I have allowed the trans community to receive a really big discount on hormones. And because we work with marginalized communities, we also provide them free over-the-counter medications and toiletry items every month, which is one thing less that they have to worry about.
Do you both think that hormone therapy should be covered the same way, let's say, chemotherapy is, or something else? If I had a transplanted organ, say, and I needed drugs, is it all the same thing?
Oh, I think so, yeah.
Well, my opinion is yes. I'm glad you asked. Illinois just actually passed something to where Medicaid is going to be covering the cost of breast augmentation and different surgeries for trans individuals.
Right.
I'm going to see if I can speak to our governor here and see if we can make that happen in Detroit, because it would help.
You mean in Michigan, not just Detroit?
Well, yeah, all of Michigan, I'm sorry. Because it definitely would help with just a plethora of things that trans women go through, like just feeling comfortable, being able to go present in the street and look the way you authentically want to represent. So those are a lot of things that people take for granted. It gives them depression, higher rates of suicide, just because they don't have access to these things.
We'd like to educate the medical community more generally about how to treat LGBT patients.
There's a lot of ignorance.
There is, using correct pronouns, even explaining partner relationships and things like that. It's really important to
even
be culturally competent.
Right.
Correct. Even explaining that sexual identity and sexual preference are two different things. Just because I identify as a woman does not necessarily mean that I like men. Now, I do, but there's trans individuals that identify with being a lesbian or there's just a big plethora. And a lot of health professionals don't understand that or don't even know the right questions to ask us medically.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the services to offer us.
I want to go back a second to Alanna, because you mentioned something that there was a lot of confusion on, including with me. What are the proper pronouns for transgender folks?
Well, Julisa's probably better equipped to answer that than myself. But
So There's a lot of old terms that were very derogatory, like homosexual, transvestite, tranny. The easiest way to just respect anybody is to ask somebody when first meeting them, how do they identify?
Right.
We also got to keep in mind that transgender just didn't happen overnight. So there's probably a plethora of people that you've met that you didn't even realize in society that they were transgender.
Right.
That's very true.
So it's honestly just respectful to ask somebody in the beginning, how do you prefer to be called and what's your preferred pronouns?
That's a good point. Are there new pronouns? I mean, there have been some attempt to invent new pronouns, haven't there been?
There have been. Like, we have letters added to our LGBTQ because
Right.
obviously they want to incorporate everybody, and there is people that are non-binary.
Yeah, I think that's mix.
Yeah.
Right?
They either are born with both sexes or they identify with both sexes. So, yeah.
But
It's best, if in doubt, to ask, but do it in a respectful and polite
sure.
way. There are definitely questions that, even if you're very well-meaning,
Right.
are totally inappropriate. We tend to kind of believe that if you wouldn't ask a straight colleague about their sex practices or their genitalia, you should not do that for your LGBT
that sounds like a
coworkers
general
and
good
colleagues
rule
either.
across the board for everybody.
That was
It's
perfect.
generally well understood that that's a bad practice.
Absolutely, common courtesy.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to ask you a difficult question.
Okay.
Where does more and more people now accept gay folks? They accept gay
I guess
marriage.
it depends on where you live.
Well,
Yes.
that is absolutely true. And my brother lives in a rural community who happens to be gay. He won't even have a mailbox because it kept getting vandalized. So
Right.
that, I probably spoke to him prudently. But I'm
depends.
wondering, are there some people in the gay community who have a hard time accepting trans folks?
There are some schisms, I think. Generally, I think that we tend to think of ourselves as LGBT, which
Right. absolutely
does include
Sure.
trans people. Fair Michigan absolutely includes trans people.
Right.
Anyone who feels that way, if you're gay or bisexual, that you can take those letters away.
Right.
That's not part of the movement.
Right.
Certainly, it's not part of any LGBT organization that I'm aware of. And I think that if you try to separate that, you're really doing a disservice to the entire community.
Julissa?
So I'd like to add something, not necessarily from the community, because I want to educate people when it comes to this. We get... Okay, so 80% of trans women experience intimate partner violence. A lot of African American trans women are killed by African American men. These are African American men that sleep with us. So though they don't identify with being gay because they are enamored with trans women,
Right.
because of the social stigma that comes with being transgender, they don't have an outlet, a support group, family members to discuss this with, because it's not common or normal for a man to be able to say, I'm attracted to this trans woman, which then leads to more violence, more rates of strangulation, rates of domestic violence. And again, until recently, my community wouldn't even come forward and report these crimes.
Is it fair to say the African community is African American community, men are sort of behind the rest of the society in accepting LGBTQ people in general?
Well, I would say all, to be honest. I specifically work with marginalized communities, so I have more
Right.
experience working with African American trans women. But I'd say that for all men, all of our cases that we've worked that include trans women, all of the men have been married and all of the men have identified with being heterosexual. So I do think that as a community, as organizations, we should start having support groups for men so that they have a better outlet on how to discuss those feelings.
Exactly. So what's Fair Michigan doing, Alanna, to sort of help with things along?
Well, we have a couple of projects that we're working on. Our signature project is the Fair Michigan Justice Project. So far, we have a partnership with the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office where we investigate and prosecute capital crimes against the LGBT community. We also just recently expanded into Ingham County, and we're working with Prosecutor Carol Seaman on the same sorts of cases in that county. So that's our signature project. That's what Julissa does a lot for us, among many other things. But
Right.
that's our signature project. And then we also just launched a trans renaming project. That is where we have a special attorney who we pay to work with our transgender clients to have legal name changes. So Julissa can talk in more detail about the kinds of hardships that people face when their driver's licenses, for example, don't match their legal name or their chosen name, and then the gender markers are
Are we allowed, last time I checked, maybe I'm behind times, you couldn't change your driver. You were assigned the gender at birth, and you were not allowed to change that.
You can now.
You can.
Yes.
You
So
can.
you don't have to have medical operations like they stated in the past.
Right.
You just have to have a letter from your doctor stating that you are on hormone therapy and that you're going through the changes. You go fill out for a passport ID card. There's organizations that we can send you to that'll cover the cost if you're trans. When you get the passport ID card, it'll have your gender on there, your new gender that you prefer. You take that to the Secretary of State with your old driver's license, and they change your driver's license, and then you do the process to change your name.
And we're also actually very optimistic about the new Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, and her efforts to right these sorts of wrongs in the first place. She actually was at Ferndale Pride over the weekend and made a particular comment about that.
And I think the governor is speaking this week at Ferndale Pride as well.
She is actually going to be there today, June 3rd, and doing a press conference or a town hall or something,
Right.
I believe, at
Sure.
Affirmations with Senator Moss. So, yeah.
Now, do we have any idea how large the trans community is in Michigan?
So we don't, only because, again, we just started getting statistics and numbers now. For so long, trans women were misgendered, and they were labeled with MSMs, which is men that have sex with men.
Right.
So I don't think until everybody as a society gets on board and we have education and cultural competency that will actually get accurate numbers and representation.
Now, we've sort of been talking, I think accidentally, as if all trans people were people who are assigned the male gender and are becoming female, but there are some folks who go the other way, right? There are women, there are people who are born female who thought they should men. Are there more of one group or the other group?
No, I think it's both as equal. Trans men have they can go about healthcare needs a little easier than what trans women can.
I don't know if that's entirely true.
Hang on a second. Make sure we understand the term. When you say trans men, do you mean a former woman who is becoming male?
Okay, so I'll give you an example.
Right.
Through their insurance company, a lot of them can get top surgery covered.
Right.
All you have to say is that breast cancer runs in your family, and that's a surgery that they don't have to worry about. As opposed to a trans woman saying, these breasts are going to make me feel complete.
Right.
So that's what I mean when I say...
Yeah.
So it's easier to have breast removed than breast augmented.
There are some issues, though, particularly as it pertains to gynecology,
Right.
that if you're a trans man, you're going to have complications with. So I think that's what I was thinking. It's hard to say, like, one person has it harder than the other. It's going to be challenging, I think.
It is. And it's the same thing for trans women like myself, going to the doctor and having to explain that I need a mammogram or I need them to check. Like, some people aren't culturally competent, and they're like, but why? Because there's breast tissue there now.
That's right.
I think
It doesn't really seem to be. You need to be a rocket scientist to figure that out.
Well,
But,
you would think
surprised.
so, but you'd be very surprised.
I would probably, I would be. Now for a delicate question. People say to me, well, I'm a liberal, but I don't know, how do I expose children to this? And people say, well, I'm afraid that if we show this as normal, my little Bobby or Susie will decide to become trans. Speak to this.
Right.
Speak to that.
For me personally, I have 2 teenage sons, and I've been raising them with my wife, Dana. I adopted them, actually, when they were 12, but she's had them since birth. You know what? We are just 2 parents.
Right,
It's exactly the same. My kids are thriving in school. They're happy, healthy. I don't know that you can say anything else besides that, really. I think that, kids are surprisingly sophisticated, honestly.
Sure.
And I think that, this is my wife. Okay, cool. No big deal.
But nobody, what I'm getting at, and to say it in an unsubtle way, no, let's say if somebody is heterosexual, some child is heterosexual, they're not going to watch Kinky Boots and decide, oh my God, I should become a trans.
I don't think it works that way, no?
Let me also say this. I was raised by a heterosexual family, both of my parents. My dad was very much a player and had like a million women, and it did not guide me in that direction.
Right.
I never knew anybody that was trans. I'm the first trans individual in my family, so I kind of just had to figure that out and learn it on my own. So I don't think it doesn't matter who raises you. It's something like that's internal, and no trans woman is going to pick for their life to be harder, to be subjected to homelessness, poverty, brutality. That's not something that
You
we
have to
pick
be
for
pretty
ourselves.
darn courageous to decide to live as trans, I would think.
Yeah, I think that trans people are some of the bravest people that I know, just to go out in a world every day, especially ones that don't reflect what society says is passable, and still live as your authentic self.
At the very best, you're exposing yourself to possible ridicule. At the very worst, in the cases that we see,
And let's also inform your listeners that the average life expectancy for a trans woman of color is 35 years old.
Yeah, that's an absolutely incredible statistic.
Now, Kim Worthy, there's a new unit, isn't there? In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but in recent years, the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office has been especially vigilant on protecting transgender people from violence.
Well, I mean, we have the partnership with the Fair Michigan Justice Project. I can't speak to the workings of the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, but she's shown great dedication in terms of being concerned about this in Wayne County, which is why she's partnering with us.
Right. In fact, in fact, I also should say that not all the board members of Fair Michigan are trans or are even LGBTQ.
That is correct. Actually, I think the majority of our board is straight.
Right. You have a very savvy young hetero lawyer who's a friend of mine, Jamie Powell Horowitz.
That's correct. She's our special prosecutor.
Which is a neat thing. What else should people know about Fair Michigan?
Well, I mean, in its sort of basic form, we are an LGBT and women's rights organization, and we're dedicated to seeing equal protections and equal justice for women and LGBTQ people in Michigan.
Right.
So, we're going to keep advocating. We're going to keep launching new programs and projects, and really kind of make sure that we're at the forefront of issues that impact the community.
And if there's anybody listening that requires services, a lot of organizations, and if you're not in our community, you wouldn't know this, a lot of organizations that service trans individuals, because of grant money and how things work, they cannot help you over the age of 30. So Fair Michigan has partnered with Ruth Ellis, and I'll be there next month, 3 days out of the week.
Tell us what Ruth Ellis is.
Ruth Ellis is a LGBT youth drop-in center. So they help people from the ages of 13 to 30 years old.
It's kind of like Covenant House for LGBTQ people,
Correct.
kids.
Yes. So they only are open 2 days out of the week. Administration is open the other 3 days. Fair Michigan and Ruth Ellis did a partnership where we will be renting their space for the other 3 days out of the week, and I will be there from 12 to 4 offering services to all trans individuals over the age of 30, specifically all of them, but over the age of 30 that would not be able to get it anywhere else.
And that is actually breaking news because we have not announced that yet.
Yes.
So
there you go. We have a scoop.
Yes.
One final thing I want to ask is, there are a lot of, I think it's fair to say, there are probably a lot of people who may be of goodwill or just, they don't know anything about trans people. They don't know how to behave. Society doesn't prepare straight people for dealing with them either. If people hear about this, they want to do something for justice, what kind of advice can you give your average person?
I mean, I suppose this seems a little bit self-serving, but certainly donating to Fair Michigan would help. But beyond that...
is it tax deductible?
It is,
okay.
Absolutely. Okay. Beyond that, Julissa, why don't you speak to that?
Donating, obviously, like Alanna said, money, obviously, we need in order to do certain things.
A lot of the gains that we've seen in Michigan really are because nonprofits are taking the lead. It's certainly not legislatively, so it does actually really matter to
There's a rumor there's an attorney general now who might have some sympathy for the community.
Yes, that's true.
And basically just familiarizing yourself with the demographic of the people that you want to help, and honestly just being respectful.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. What have I neglected to ask you about the issue that I should have?
I'm not really sure. I think we've covered a lot of ground here, actually, yeah.
Well, as I said in the banquet last year, I'll be very happy on the day when there's a trans person who's running for governor, and the first question they're asked is, how are you going to fix the damn roads?
There you go.
Then I'll think
That's
we may.
right.
So, Julisa Abad, Alanna Maguire, thank you very much for making this time for us today.
You so much.
Thanks for
Continue
having
good
us.
luck and keep us posted on what's going on. So,
Very good.
well, that's about it for now, except for my signature essay coming up. I hope you'll check out my blog, as I said, lessonberryinc.com. That's ink as in ink pen, and subscribe both to it and these podcasts on YouTube. And hope you'll listen to our next episode soon. Some of our past episodes, tell your friends, and feel free to send me a message on Facebook or via email, or send large amounts of money. But in any event, keep listening, watching, and take it easy, but whenever you can, take it. I'm Jack Lessenberry. Thanks for joining us. I once was in a special, high-pressure program in graduate school. My best friend in it was a quiet, soft-spoken young man who later went on to work for a national magazine in Japan. He was brilliant, funny, and had a Japanese wife and a young son. Some years later, I got a letter from my friend who wrote to tell me that he had realized he was really a she, a woman trapped in the wrong body, and that she was going to have gender reassignment surgery. I was smart enough to be totally accepting, but naive enough that I asked why she just didn't live as a woman without the surgery, which sounded both painful and expensive. She told me she thought she would have to kill herself if she was unable to live in a woman's body. We haven't been in touch for years, due mainly to moving and losing addresses, but I hope she's well, fulfilled, and happy. I know now that one doesn't choose the gender they identify with, any more than they choose to be gay, or I chose to be not quite 5 feet 8 inches tall. What I still don't understand is why any of us think someone else's orientation is part of anyone's business besides their own, and perhaps their loved ones, or why people are so profoundly disturbed by this, often to the point of violence, even homicidal rages. And more that some people think being transgender or gay is a sin and quote the Bible to back this up. Well, we have religious freedom in this country, thanks to what many consider our God-given Constitution. But even leaving that aside, you can use the Bible to justify just about anything on any side of any issue. Again, even leaving that aside, the Bible doesn't say that sexual sins, or lust as it puts it, are any worse than any of the other deadly sins. I've never read a story about a religious maniac physically assaulting anyone for gluttony or laziness or envy, though a look around your neighborhood or shopping mall will show that all three seem far more prevalent than any other of the mortal sins. It also seems to me that people who are comfortable with their own sexual identities and orientation are much less likely to be uncomfortable with those who are different. Last year, I had the honor of speaking at a banquet for the Fair Michigan Foundation, which is dedicated to justice for LGBTQ people of all kinds, which to me means justice for all of us. Fair Michigan is supported by Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy, and its president then was Dana Nessel, the Democratic nominee for Attorney General, who now is Attorney General, so they have some reason to hope for a better future. I'm not an expert on human sexuality, nor on religion. But I do know that the transgender folks I've known have been decent, if long-suffering human beings. And Jesus in the Bible is supposed to have said, "Whatever you do unto the least of these, you also do unto me," meaning we should treat every life as equally sacred. I'm not religious, but that seems good enough for me. It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me today on the Zing Media Network. I hope you'll be looking out for other offerings soon.